with our second guest for a threesome tonight, Sam, another longtime close personal friend of mine who's been an enthusiastic listener of the show. We're going to be covering the band Blue Ash tonight. Sam, how much familiarity do you have with the band Blue Ash from the great state of Ohio?
I have none.
Nor do I. How did you even pick this album? Because they're not even in best ever albums when I try and look them up.
It was considered one of the 5 lost albums of the 70s in a chart that was made by Rolling Stone. They consider it to be one of the 5 great underappreciated albums. And so I saw that list and I said, which one looks like the most interesting one? And I picked Blue Ash.
The album is called No More, No Less, and it is from 1973, I believe. Let me double check that.
You are correct.
Okay. All right. And I don't have any numbers because they're not in best ever albums. So they're so under the radar, the best ever albums. We're going to have to go in there and put them on a list or something, I guess. They're not on the Rolling Stone list, and they're not on the
deep
1,000 albums to hear before you die list.
Oh, there we go. All right. Well, this should be a fun reaction. I think this is the biggest deep dive that we've done since Matt and I did the Monks in the 60s. I think that was the last time I can remember us doing an album that is sort of this off the radar.
Okay, so let's go with initial thoughts. Sam, what did you think of this band, and what was your perspective coming in listening to it?
Sure. This was certainly an unknown album from an unknown band. I'd like to think I was musically inclined and had a sense of music history. Mm-hmm. But then when John threw this text to me to say, here's the album, I went on to Apple Music, couldn't find it. Went on to Spotify, couldn't find it. Not that I'm plugging those music services, but I just couldn't find it anywhere. Right. So talk about long lost albums, John, right? Like, this is so lost that I had to just use YouTube. And luckily some dude had it. And I was able to actually listen to the album where you could actually hear the vinyl hiss and pop and crackles from the vinyl overlay that they did into YouTube.
I noticed that too. Yep.
And so on the album as a whole, it was okay. I mean, it wasn't great. It wasn't awful. Certainly it wasn't on some of those albums where you guys have in the past just, bombed it. Like, for instance, I think it was one of you, I think it might have been Josh, your take on Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, where you just, panned it, right? I think was it you or was it Matt that panned it?
We were both kind of negative on the album, for sure.
And this one, I didn't have any strong feelings. I tried to do the just one take listen, and I did it, wrote a few notes down, and nothing really, like a few things caught my ear, but nothing that sort of stayed with me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get it. Totally. It was like when we were talking about the Nuggets album from last week. It's like one of those bands that was on that almost, except for the 70s.
Yeah, I kind of liken the album to Neapolitan ice cream, right? It's still ice cream. It's good, but it's not anything that's kind of, full-on flavor where you just can sink your teeth into it and go like, oh man, after, one bowl, I want more. Like, this is like, okay. And I heard it, listened to it, and didn't, none of the songs came back to me and say, I want to hear this again and again and again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good analogy. It is totally palatable, but it's not going to blow your mind, right?
Mm-hmm. This album, my take on this album is 10-cent beer night at a Midwestern bar where you're a hardworking blue-collar guy and you're trying to get laid by that friend of your friend, you know what I mean, who you kind of know, who's kind of cute, and you're drinking pony beers and you're listening to a band, either, when they're in front of you gigging before they're popular or just on the jukebox in the year 1973, because this is of its time, isn't it? This is like, this one, the first things I thought of is we haven't done a lot of those '70s pop bands.
Yes.
Like Big Star and Badfinger and bands like that. But this has a little bit of that type music that I'll be very interested to get into. And this also has a little bit of that like Midwestern Bob Seger feel to it a little bit in terms of just, it's not quite of country music. It's not quite fully like blues music or R&B. It's got elements of all of them, sort of a syncretic mix of a 1973 cocktail. And if the new album we did was driving down the Autobahn in sort of like a bizarre synthetic movie, this is like a Wednesday night at Lucky's in Akron, Ohio in 1973, after you've gotten off work and you're listening to a band who plays good solid rock and roll music, isn't reinventing the wheel, but they're like your best local bar band, and that is the feel that I got from this album. And then, of course, they throw in a Beatles cover just out of nowhere in there, which I thought was very interesting. Which even that fit, because it's like, all right, we're at song number 9. We're gonna do a little something by a band called the Beatles, and even that one kind of fit like in it, you know.
And the Bob Dylan cover.
And I was going to say, and Dylan's in there too. So it's almost like they strategically threw the covers in along with, we're going to play something that's our own. And now we're going to play a song you might know, you know? And I believe I recognized the song Abracadabra, Have You Seen Her? And this is where Matt would always go, is that the Steve Miller Band? No, it's not the Steve Miller Band song. It's a very different song than, did you like my impersonation of Matt there, by the way? I did not do flat. Sorry, Matt, that was not, but no, it's not that one, just in case. But yeah, no, I thought the songs were very much inoffensive. But like I said before, they didn't remake the wheel. They were of a time and a place. I feel this sound continued to get more and more popular as the 70s went on, but it was more and more popular with a bunch of bands that would have some hits. I talked about 38 Special before. Like, that's a band from the early 80s that kind of did this. Like, Molly Hatchet is a southern version of this. And even some of the AOR we get later, like, there's even vibes of like an REO Speedwagon type feel in this, isn't there?
That was really kind of what I went to listening to this.
Like Riding the Storm Out, like REO Speedwagon, not necessarily like, you know, Wheels Are Turning REO Speedwagon. So
even some like Journey too, I heard in this a little bit.
Well, and you don't get much more AOR than REO Speedwagon and Journey. I mean, that's like, you know, two of the heads on the Mount Rushmore of AOR right there, album-oriented rock. So, Josh, I've talked a lot right here. I apologize. Let's hear your take.
Yeah, so I was, like Sam and you, I was pleasantly surprised by this album. It went down easy, but I was kind of shocked at how early this was. I was expecting it to be probably late 70s, and for it to be 73, there isn't really anything that we've listened to up until this point that's kind of in this mode yet of this
because critics tend to hate this sound. That's why they're so up their ass, and this is definitely not being made for critics, you know.
It's a real hodgepodge of things. I heard like a little bit of glam and T-Rex, definitely. I heard some Who. I heard
good call.
The Beatles. They're trying to incorporate. They've incorporated some hand claps and kind of more poppy sounds in some of the songs, like Plain to See. There's even a little psychedelia in there with like Smash My Guitar and also like maybe almost like a Bon Jovi sound too. I heard that at times, like What Can I Do For You? That sounded like that. And yeah, it just seems like they were this is clearly a band that was like influenced by a bunch of other bands that were really popular, and they just kind of tried to make their own sound, and they didn't quite make it in terms of popularity, but they definitely gave it their best shot. I mean, this band doesn't even have anything in Wikipedia. It's just like the track listing. So this is how under the radar it is. I did find some bios, and one thing I want to mention is in 1974, you ready for this? Yeah.
The band was a popular opening act. Do you want to hear who they opened up for in 1974 alone?
Please.
They opened up for Ted Nugent.
Okay.
The Stooges, Bob Seger, which no surprise there, and Aerosmith. And so here's another interesting thing. After this album,
those are all Midwest bands,
they were the
right?
first band ever signed to, except for Aerosmith, who's a Boston band. Yep.
Yeah.
But three of them are much like our friend Sam here, Michiganders. So, and they're an Ohio band, so it makes sense.
Right over the border. Yep.
Yeah, they were also the first band ever signed to Playboy's ill-fated record label, Playboy Records, in 1977. And unfortunately, that second album did not go well because the band did call it quits in 1979. So, Sam, did you hear, we've done a lot of referencing here, right? Like to other bands. And I kind of want to tell people what this album sounds like because chances are all but the most diehard Blue Ash fans have never heard this album. So how would you describe the music on this album? We kind of said it's a pastiche of different artists. Like who would you say it sounds like? What you said, you took some notes. What stood out in terms of the musicality?
No, absolutely. I agree with Josh wholeheartedly in that I could clearly hear Beatles and I could clearly hear The Who, especially The Who with the drums. Like I heard the Beatles in terms of early Beatles, in terms of their first few albums with the harmonies and just I don't want to call it simple, because I think that really essentializes the music a little bit too much. But it is just your 4-chord song, your 3-chord song, and rinse, wash, repeat of here's the lyrics, chorus, lyrics, chorus, lyrics, chorus. That's it. And nothing really, like, to me, the standout songs, and this is kind of where I'll kind of disagree a little bit with Josh in that they were trying to find a sound. The sound was pretty much start to finish all right there. They never really hit anything in terms of some, at least for me, some hidden gems, because you could hear the Keith Moon-like drum rolls throughout. You could hear the Beatles harmonizing of vocals throughout the album. But to me, they almost had like that weird, I don't want to call it weird, but the psychedelic last track on the A side of Smash My Guitar. And then they finish off with, I thought was their strongest song of Let There Be Rock. Because it was really, for me, just a lot of fun, and it showed some promise in terms of a little bit more balls in the voice and just kind of driving more of a stronger guitar riff, where the other songs were just meh. And they never really caught my ear in terms of, as I was working out, to make me go, oh, what song is this? What track? It was all just kind of played throughout in the background, and nothing really kind of pulled me to say, like, oh, let me find out more about this after the one-take listen.
Yeah, I think Josh was right on the money with some of the glam standbys too. Maybe not as much the T-Rex glam, but I don't know how familiar you guys are with the band Sweet, but you probably know the song Ballroom Blitz and stuff like that. The lead singer of this band actually sang quite a bit like the lead singer of Sweet, sort of that like, wig, wham, bam, gonna make you my man. That sort of cadence in terms of the singing. He even sang the Beatles cover and the Dylan cover that way. So when you're listening to that, it's like a very phonetic, sounded out way of singing, bluesy kind of it. The guitar work is in what I would consider to be the power pop adjacent range, like we said with some of the bands there, but also it soars at times to that anthemic sound that other bands stretched out a lot more. Because these songs are not going 4 or 5 minutes, right? I think the longest song on this album is 3 minutes and 50 seconds, and the next longest is 3:23. Most of them chalk in mid 2:30s, early 3s, and so they're not going long like the AOR bands that also begin to sound like them. But yeah, it's power pop with the foundations of the AOR guitar sound, that and that stuff did come from, as we talked about, the Beatles are the ultimate power pop band, right? That's where it comes from. To some degree, the Who are too. They're just a plugged in harder version of that sound. It's funny because these bands are this band is also decidedly American, so I think they were part of that group of bands that took that power pop sound and did an American version of it. When you think of power pop bands from America in the 60s, there really weren't a lot, right? The Byrds, but the Byrds led to that jangle pop sound,
Right.
that kind of fell out of favor in the 70s, and didn't really come back till the 80s. Outside of that, power pop was kind of, it was whether you were going to do sort of a cross-Atlantic version like the bands we talked about, or whether you're going to go with a very British version like the Kinks, right? And this is a lot more like the cross-Atlantic version of it, mixed with some of the staples that became AOR. And so they're very much a transition band. I think it was interesting how much people in the 70s liked this album, because it was critically well received, because this is the type of music that I don't see being critically acclaimed the rest of the 70s. And it's the type of music that the bands that are similar to this, like Badfinger and Big Star, who I mentioned, and there's others, they really were like cult favorites, right? And even carried over to like the 80s, where, some of those power pop bands like the Replacements come to mind immediately. They were very much under the radar. They were known by music fans, but they didn't break through. So it's a genre that it took a long time to break through to the mainstream, and there'd be small bits and pieces. So, yes, slight thumbs pointing up for me on this one.
Yeah, they did. I mean, Sam brought up Let There Be Rock. That's kind of like almost a proto-Kiss song, or trying for like an arena big sound type of anthem, right? But there is no like standout single or hit on this album, I would say.
I did like Abracadabra.
Okay. What did you
and
think,
Smash
Sam?
That's my guitar too.
Did you have a standout tracks on this?
Like I said, the last two in terms of on the A side and the B side of Smash My Guitar and Let There Be Rock, I thought those were the two tracks where I go, okay, there's some promise there, where you can maybe see, like maybe the sophomore album would sort of elevate those two sounds. Because for me, after the Beatles cover of Any Time at All, the next four songs of Here We Go Again, What Can I Do For You, All I Want, Wasting My Time, for me, they all just kind of blended in together in terms of the sound. Nothing really popped out. And then it came in to finish with Let There Be Rock, where I was like, oh, okay, there's something there for me as when I hear their music here's their voice. Because up until that point, a lot of it was just, like John said, that bar band of we're gonna, we have a sound, but it's very mimicking of the Beatles, of the Who, of all these other bands that influenced us as teenagers. And here it is we're this pastiche of music where and musically they're good, they're fine. Guitar is fine, drums are fine. The bass line had some really nice licks where you can hear the melody tied to the drums, which I thought was a nice touch. But nothing really stood out for me, and I kind of gave this more of like a thumb sideways of it's kind of in between of it's not bad, it's not good, it's just there. I'm just curious about your takes of what you like, because you guys talked about this a little bit in the past with the idea of cover songs. Like, for me, their cover songs here, it just didn't really move the needle for me. Whereas when I listen to, like, say, when Aretha Franklin does covers of some songs, you go like, oh wow, like there is clearly movement down there that says this has some passion, and you can hear like, man, this is really good because she's owning it. I didn't think these guys really owned the covers so much as just kind of more like playing it note for note because they really like the song.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. Well, I don't think that covers do them any favors. Anytime at All is pretty much just a faster or like slightly harder version of the same exact song. I mean, it sounds exactly the same. They don't do anything to make it their own, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's tribute covers and then there's reworked covers, right? And one of the things is a lot of tribute covers come from people that are in the same genre. It's funny because we were talking today, I sent along a cover of Fake Plastic Trees by Radiohead, covered by the Gin Blossoms today to Josh and Matt. And it was a surprisingly good cover, but it was a cover that was that was done the same way that Radiohead did it, right?
Yep.
Which is kind of sounds funny if you know both, but it was a perfect example of that, like someone doing the song as a tribute as opposed to like a new thing. Whereas like recently there was the Chris Cornell Nothing Compares to You, which in its own right, the Sinead O'Connor was a cover as well of the Prince, song. And although the Prince song didn't get released till after the O'Connor, so maybe that's not the greatest example. But, there seems to be a lot of covers throughout music. I thought it was fine. But once again, it's the type of thing that you would want to see at a concert, not necessarily on an album, because it was a little too on the nose. They did a very good job, though. It's just trying to cover the Beatles as a fellow, power pop, pop rock band is tough because the Beatles are the freaking Beatles for a reason. You know what I mean? They were just, ungodly tight and melodic. And so from that it suffers, but it was fine. I mean, the Dusty Old Fairgrounds by Bob Dylan was an interesting choice, I would say, but they grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, and my guess is they saw a lot of Dusty Old Fairgrounds, so maybe it spoke to them. Did you guys notice, by the way, how many songs on this album, the titles of it were songs that were famous songs by other people, like Abracadabra and Here We Go Again and All I Want and Wasting My Time and Let There Be Rock. I mean, all of those were songs that were not the same song, that weren't covered, but that other artists did that were bigger songs. So after a while I started laughing. I'm like, this is like a who's who of song titles that other people would take and make bigger songs. So
yeah, that's strange because all those songs came after this
all did.
Album, right? Yeah. Okay.
But I could run through all those song titles and you could name probably who did the songs, right? Yeah. For the most part. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
definitely.
Mm-hmm. All right. So final thoughts here as we tie it. Sam will give you the last word right here. Would you, to our listeners who, for the most part, are not going to be familiar with Blue Ash, is it worth taking the 35 minutes and 32 seconds to listen to this, or would you direct them in a different way?
I would direct them in a different way.
Okay.
It just didn't really, because they can find. I mean, the 90s are full of generic rock, and same thing with the 80s and the aughts, right? There's a bunch, and even now to some degree, there's a bunch of just generic bands that are out there, but it doesn't really. For me, I think it is because it is a lost album. It is. Lost for a reason because it didn't really stand out.
Okay, interesting. So not really a hidden gem waiting to be uncovered. More like
correct. Like I said, it's just
buried.
it was just Neapolitan ice cream. It does the job, but it's nothing that's gonna say like, man, I gotta get some more.
Yeah.
What do you think, Josh?
I'm kind of in thumbs in the middle. It's lukewarm. I don't see anything transcendent about this. Like Sam kind of alluded to, maybe their sophomore album they could have made the leap and maybe made their sound their own more, or go in a direction that is uniquely them, but they never really seem to get out of that based on this and their history. So I think this is, considering this is a deep dive for us, I'd say, listen to everything else that we've talked about first and then go this.
Everything else. This is 211th or whatever albums we've covered.
Yeah.
You put it that low, huh?
It's not in terms of it being bad, just like, I guess all the
non-essential.
All the variables, historiosity, influence, sound, all those things that we talk about.
So it's like the title of the album, no more, no less.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, well played.
Yeah.
Let me do
themselves.
Let me do one last game since we rarely get a chance to do this. For those that may be of the same demographic genre or maybe more familiar with sort of an 80s, 90s OOs ethos, okay? Who is a band from the 80s, 90s, or OOs that would be the equivalent of this band in their time?
Oh, jeez.
Not necessarily by sound, but in terms of like where they rank in the pantheon. You know what I'm saying? Like in the context of
Counting Crows.
Importance. Ooh, that's pretty high though, because there's a lot of people who love Counting Crows.
Good for them. They can,
But you're okay. So you don't. Oh, you don't. Okay, gotcha. I'm thinking less. I like the band?
But again, it is not like I don't go out of my way to go Counting Crows, right? Like I like their first album, but it never really kind of went beyond that for me. It's kind of like Gin Blossoms, right? There's another band that just kind of is just there, right? Like that '90s.
Oh, but they had way more hits. You know, it's kind of hard to name a band that had no hits equal with two bands that had hits.
Maybe
like
I'm just
even
jealous.
People that. But you get what I'm saying. Yeah, guess what I'm saying? Like, Hey Jealousy and like Mr. Jones Alone, right, are songs that I think move this. Can I give you my description for this for '90s bands?
Yeah.
This band in their era is the Toad the Wet Sprocket of their era.
That's a good one.
Yep, or Vertical Horizon if you're a 2000s dub. You know what I mean? That is the niche that they go. Perfectly cromulent music, but not necessarily. And even though they had hits, and this one did have, you know, Abracadabra did chart, they have hits that, like, unless you know the band or you were an enthusiastic fan who followed them, you couldn't, like, right off the bat, can you guys tell me what the hits are from Toad the Wet Sprocket and Vertical Horizon?
No, not by name.
Sam?
Nope.
But you knew those names of the bands, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Therein lies where Blue Ashes for me.
Yeah. It would be like Eve 6 or
Ooh, okay.
I don't know, something else in that vein too.
But of that, like, this kind of brings me to this other thought too. Like, as John, you said, like, where I was just kind of waiting maybe for that sophomore album for them to explode. It's kind of like with Stone Temple Pilots, where there was that whole big comparison of them to saying like, oh, they're just Pearl Jam light, or, you know, wannabe Pearl Jam because of the whole, you know, vocal inflections similar. Right, but at least Stone Temple
God! Wait
Pilots,
till we get to Stone Temple Pilots in the '90s, because I have a whole essay on that. Because I think they're like the most underrated band of the '90s.
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of,
like, they
critical
evolved
reputation
and found their sound, right, as time wore on, and they kind of became, you know, their band. Like, they had something. Where this band, unfortunately, they just never really. It didn't seem like they could find anything.
That's why they're Vertical Horizon. Or
of the 70s.
You know, Toad the Wet Sprocket. Yeah, you know what I mean? They kind of just... Well, Toad the Wet Sprocket was around longer, I think, but I don't think Vertical Horizon was. So
there is some 90s band I'm thinking of that maybe 2000s, that I can't think of the name, but they're kind of the same thing. They were on the radio.
Clean those stacks.
They were on the radio a lot, but I don't know. It's like Fuel or something like that. I don't know.
But all those bands had bigger hits than this band did.
Yeah,
you have to go to someone who had like a moderate hit and didn't last very long. Like the fact that we all, like, right off the bat, I can, you know, the Eve 6, like, I would swallow my pride, you know, that shitty song, you know, like in Fuel, like that Hemorrhage song and Shimmer, right? Like and people know that, oh, I know that. So, I can't even compare them to, like, you know, bands like Spin Doctors, because, you know hits from them, you know? It's gotta be a band that, like, existed to people of the time, like, oh, I remember that band. Oh, do you remember their song? Not really. You don't remember what their album name was? Not really. It can't be Counting Crows, for example, because even though I'm not a Counting Crows fan, I know their first album was August and Everything After. You know, that automatically makes them too
well known.
like famous. Yeah, too well known, you know. So anyway, there's a little bit of a tangent because somebody said to me, why do you guys never talk about the 80s and the 90s and the 00s? So there's a little bit of a segue right there for those listeners that are looking for us together. Well, we haven't. We try to be of the moment, you know what I mean? But there you go. There's a little bit of a nod to you people so you can shut up now. So, yeah. All right. Well, Sam, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciated it.
No, thank you both. This was fun. I appreciate it.